It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Senator, presidential candidate, lover of life, pro-life supporter in a way that we can't even imagine, father, husband, but most importantly, lover of God, Rick Santorum.
Okay, that's not the reason I came. I have been asked, and I know Frank recommended me, and thank you, Frank Beckman, for that. And
let's go Red Wings.
And I'm a very comfortable and confident Penguin fan standing here in front of you. The reason I came is because of the family sitting at the table right here to my left. Jesse and Brad and their daughter Faith, who you got an opportunity to meet a few years ago when they gave their testimony up here. Brad has been after me for a long time to come and to speak at this dinner, and they are an inspiration to me. Their daughter has the same condition that our daughter has, Bella. Their daughter is 9. Our daughter is 9. She's a little bit older, I think. She'll be our daughter will be 10 in May. But we have been on a journey together over these past many years. You talk about long odds, like the Red Wings making the playoffs, or shorter odds, like the Penguins winning a third cup. You talk about long odds. The survival rate for children born with the condition that Bella and Faith are born with is 1 in 100 survive to their first year of life. And so we are living a miracle. We are living a miracle because we didn't believe what the medical community told us. We didn't believe that. I just talked to someone here tonight who had a child, was diagnosed with a severe birth defect. And the first thing the doctor says is, well, of course you should have an abortion. And we were told that. I mean, they knew who I was. And they still said, well, in this case, they said, we legally have to tell you, that abortion is an option you should seriously consider. And I just looked at that. I said, why, if my son, or in this case, my daughter, is in peril for her life, why would my decision would be to kill her? What father, what mother reaction if you find out your child is sick, you find out your child has got a fatal disease, oh, let's kill her before we even try to fight that disease or that condition. But that's the way of the world today. And in the case of this particular disorder, the entire medical community, very, very few in the medical community, don't just say, do nothing, let the child die. The child has medical or physical disabilities. She won't have a useful life. Oh, I heard that over and over again. Useful life. Useful for what? Useful for what? What is the purpose of our life? I mean, in the world today, of course, the purpose always says, to get stuff, right? Accumulate wealth and succeed and all those things. That's the prevailing view in society, but it's not our view. Not the people in this room. That's why you're here. The purpose of life is to know, love, and serve the Lord so you can be with Him in the next life. That's the purpose of life. We forget about that. We forget about that it's not about getting stuff for us, accumulating anything. It's about putting your treasure where it's supposed to be. They told us how difficult it would be, how much pain and suffering she would be in. As if pain and suffering are a really bad thing. They are a bad thing. I mean, nobody wants pain, nobody wants suffering, but we all know life is full of pain and suffering. We have an opioid addiction crisis because people don't want to be in pain. In fact, a lot of opioid addictions are because people are afraid of being in pain. They're not in pain, but they're afraid they might be in pain. Sacrifice. When do you hear that word very often anymore? Do we have to sacrifice? That's the life we signed up for with Bella, and the Smiths signed up for with Faith. And it has made all the difference. It has made life a real purpose-driven life. And so they asked me to come and talk to you, I couldn't say no. Because I couldn't wait for the opportunity to remind you of the blessing that you have right here in Oakland County, that you have in the Smiths and their family and others who are here. I know other parents of trisomy 18 children are here. The blessing of people who dared to love, knowing the chances are that you would never be loved in return, that you would just experience hurt and pain and sacrifice. Those are special people at a time when we need to hold up special people to see how we should live a well-lived life. They don't get to do all the things that you get to do because they have a full-time care responsibility. But I know Karen feels the same way. People say, why isn't your wife here? Because my wife's home with Bella. And we wouldn't trade it for anything. That's what they stand for. The dignity and value and worth of every human life, no matter how imperfect. It came to me one night when I was standing over Bella's crib. She had just gotten back from the hospital. She almost died. And I was standing there just looking at her in the crib sleeping. She was just a few months old. And it hit me. I don't know why it didn't hit me before, but it just hit me at that moment. Sometimes those things that are just so obvious just don't hit you until one of those quiet moments. And I looked at her and I realized that she would never be able to do anything for me. That she was completely incapable of doing anything. She'd never bring me soup if I was sick or do a chore or even say, I love you, Dad, because Bella will never talk. All she could do is love me. And that's enough. And I got to thinking, isn't that the way God sees all of us? In His eyes, we are completely disabled. I mean, think of God and then think of us. A little lower than the angels by a lot. In the eyes of God, we are completely disabled. And all He wants from us is to love Him. Faith and Bella are teachers to a world that needs them. And so I feel very blessed to be here to tell you of my little girl and to remind you of your little girl. And that the work you're doing here is exactly what God is calling you to do. Is to love Him. What did He say? What you do to the least of these, is there anyone less than a helpless little child in the womb, completely dependent on the love of one person? And if at any point in time during that 9 months that person refuses to love, their life is over. And you're there to try to help find that love somewhere, to help pull that out of that person who is struggling and suffering because they've been lied to in a world that is increasingly full of lies about right and wrong. You're there to find love. That's what this organization does. It tries to identify somewhere deep inside that person that connection that God is real, that he loves you, and because of that, you can love. That's what you do. How cool is that? That's why you're here. You're here because you're with an organization that is the heart of the Lord. So first and foremost, I want to thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for stepping up, not just for a free meal. I know a lot of you are here for a free meal. I get that. But you're here because you're open to listening. You're open to what God is calling you to do. The world's, for most of us in this room, who've been around a few years, most of the people in this room are, well, maybe half the people in this room are in around my age or maybe a little older. So let me talk to you. When you look at the world today, do you feel good about the future of our country and where our culture is going? Do you feel like we're on an upward swing toward trying to be a country that's closer to what God is calling us to be? I think if you're like most, the answer with that would be no. And here's what I'm going to say to you. You got to own that. Because it happened on our watch. It didn't happen 100 years ago. In the last 50 years, this country has changed beyond what anyone would have predicted it could have changed. Things that are commonplace, that we accept, would have been abhorrent 50 years ago. And how did it happen? Come on. Because of us. Didn't happen because of anybody else. You can say, well, I didn't do. That doesn't wash. One of my favorite sayings is, every day we get up and we tell ourselves lies so we can live. And here's the biggest lie. I'm just one person. I can't do anything. I mean, this is way bigger than me. So I can't do anything. Right? I mean, I'm powerless. I mean, these are big societal trends, big corporations, politics, all these things, the popular culture. Hollywood is money and power, and I'm just one person. So what can I do? And so we convince ourselves, we lie to ourselves, that trying to do something is just a fool's errand, and so we do nothing. You know this story. I mean, you know, you've heard this axiom before. The devil doesn't try to get good people to do bad things. He doesn't go out and take a fine person here who goes to church and reads her Bible and does the things that she needs to do. He doesn't work to get her to do bad things, to commit murder or horrible things, steal things. No, what does he try to get her to do? Nothing. Nothing. What'd the Lord say? Lukewarmness. What does he do? I won't do that in front of you. Might get someone wet up here. Those who are followers of Christ in the last 50 years have been lukewarm, and the other side has been on fire. A gentleman came up to me after my talk today at lunch and said, I'm trying to work on something, but it just, I'm not going to succeed. And it's frustrating. I said, well, what are you going to do? Well, I tried. Do you realize when the other side loses, okay, well, we lost. That's it. We're going to go away. They'll lose a case in the Supreme Court, and the next day they'll file another case. You say, well, they're going to lose. They don't care. They're passionate. They have a view of the world that they want, and they're going to do their best to impose it on you. And we just say, well, we tried. Gave it my best. We're like frogs sitting in a pot of water on a stove. Slowly and slowly, the culture is changing. And we sit there and we say, well, things are still pretty good for me. I mean, it's not what it used to be, but, I'm still pretty good. Until you're not. And then what? Look at abortion. People look at Roe versus Wade, but the reality is that most states in this country had passed laws legalizing abortion before Roe versus Wade. That's why the court did it, because the trend was clear. Where were the big fights? There weren't. We're comfortable. We're comfortable until it's taken away from us. And then we just get used to it. We adapt. 50 million children have died. That's okay with us. We're adapting. We've adapted. We've lived with that. We live with a country that kills its children. The Aztecs. Oh, it's not as visible, but it's every bit as lethal. And we just adapt. For a long time, there were a group of people out there who would get angry about it. They were the leaders who would go out and speak and fire and brimstone and condemn abortion and abortionists and that didn't get us very far. And then this movement came along. And believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, this movement, which is based on what? Love. This movement is based on love. This is a ministry that is at the heart of our Lord, based on love. And guess what's happening? We're winning. Now, we could be winning a lot more. As somebody likes to say, so much you'd be tired of winning. But we could be winning a lot more, a whole lot more. If, as Tim said, we had more resources to reach more people. When you save a life of a child, you're not just saving the life of that child. You're saving that mother's life too. And you're creating two and probably more who will be witnesses to Christ's love in their community, in their families. You're spreading the gospel. And you don't even have to talk. All you have to do is show his love. That is the coolest thing about what you do. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, what can I do? Well, obviously, you're at a fundraiser, so it shouldn't be really hard to figure out the first thing you can do. So yes, you can do that. And as Tim said, we can pray. And yes, you must do that. But I'm asking you to think anew here. I'm asking you to think really hard. What can you do? You're here, I believe, because God called you to be here to hear this message. What can you do? Yes, here. But think. We spend very little time these days because we have these ridiculous machines. Tim, you left your phone. We have these machines that consume us. 6-7 hours a day. You, me, consumed. Contemplative time, what's that? Taking time to think, to be alone, and think about what God is calling you to do, what's that? But I'm asking you tonight to do that. There'll be a time after I'm done to think about what God is calling you to do. People ask, well, what can I do? My answer is always the same. If anybody comes up to me, if you come up to me after, what can I do? I'll tell you the same thing. Do something. The Lord needs you. You say, well, this is such desperate times and things are so bad. And my answer to that when people tell me that is, thanks be to God. If things are really great, God wouldn't need you. But he does. You say, well, God doesn't need anything. Wrong. God uses you for his will. You are indispensable. The question is whether you will tap into that. And I can tell you this is true for me. I mean, I'm here speaking to you and I'm giving you a little, little bit of it. But I can tell you, for years, even in politics, I wanted nothing to do with that. Last thing I want to do is quiet time to listen to the Lord. I was a driven man. I was elected to Congress when I was 32 years old. That doesn't happen very often. I mean, it was in a miracle race. You would think that a race that happened like mine, 1 in a million, a guy like me wins a race like I won. Against a 14-year incumbent in a district that was a +10 Democratic district, in a bad election year, midterm George Bush, the first Bush. We lost seats in Congress that year. It was a horrible election. I had no money. I mean, no money. I was outspent 3, 4, 5 to 1, whatever it was. Got no endorsements, nothing. Got no money from anybody in Washington, nothing. Just knocked on doors, had volunteers. In a miracle, I won. Now, you would think that it would dawn upon me that something beyond me was responsible, but no, it didn't. No, I'm just that good. Right? Anybody want to get a mirror up and say, yeah, me too? Right? I'm just that good. Then they put me in a district with 20-point deficit. 20-point Democratic deficit. And I won. Again. Then I ran for the United States Senate in a state with 1 million more registered Democrats and Republicans against another incumbent. And I won. I was good. But all of a sudden I had a 6-year term. And darn if that contemplative time started to come into my life. I actually had time to think. And something happened. And I commend this to you. I'll never forget this moment because it changed my life. I was a freshman senator, 36 years old. The youngest senator by, 20 years probably. That year I had my picture taken and I was on Time magazine with Strom Thurmond. He was still in the Senate then. And it was Strom, and then I stood behind him. Strom's a little shorter than I am. And the reason I had my picture taken with Strom, that I was the first senator elected to the United States Senate who wasn't born when Strom came to the United States Senate. So yes, I was the youngest senator by a while. But I'm walking down the hallway in the Capitol building, and a senator came up to me. I didn't know him that well. And he put his arm on my shoulder and said, "Did you know we have a Senate Bible study here?" I said, "No, I didn't know you did." He said, "Well, would you be interested in coming?" That was it. Well, I'm Catholic, and contrary to what some people who are not Catholic here, we do occasionally read the Bible. For the record. For the record. I know you don't think we do. And so I started going to a Bible study. And we moved my family down to Washington because I had young kids and I was never seeing them. And we found a church, a parish, and the priest just preached the gospel like I'd never heard before. I'll never forget the first time, and I was just blown away. I was so excited until I got to the car, and then I was mad. 36 years of going to church, and it's the first time I felt someone really preached the gospel to me. So I would say to you lay people, you non-clergy, don't be afraid to put your arm on someone who could use a little prodding to find the path to the Lord. And to you clergy, get with it. I went for 5 years as a House member and a senator, vowing never to say the word abortion on the floor of the House or Senate, never to get involved in a debate. Not that I wasn't pro-life, I was, but I was never going to do that. I was not going to be that kind of conservative. Because there's one thing, how many, name pro-life active House members and senators. Name the leaders of the pro-life movement in the House and Senate. You can't. Why? Me. Because they saw what they did to me. They came after me like came after Donald Trump. Seriously. I mean, brutal. Media was brutal. The left was brutal. It's one thing to be pro-life. They'll put up with that, but just don't you say a word. Don't you try to convince anybody else. Don't you try to do anything. Then they'll come after you. I remember my children, after I started to do a bill called partial birth abortion ban back in the 90s, and I led the charge on that. The media would go after me, and my children, who were still in single digits at that point in time, not in number, I only have 7 kids, I don't have more than 7 kids, but in age, single digit, they would occasionally see the paper, and I had to convince them that my first name wasn't Ultra, because I became the ultra-conservative senator from Pennsylvania. So there's a reason. Why? Because you pay a price. A lot of kids will come up to me, particularly in evangelical churches when I visit, and they'll say, "What's your favorite verse?" And I'll tell them, and they'll be very disappointed. Because my favorite verse is John 15:18. The world will hate you, but remember, they hated me first. You see, we live in a world where people don't want to be hated. Do you want to be hated? The answer to that should be yes. Remember, they hated him first. You don't want to be hated because you're a bad person. I get that. Neither do I. But you shouldn't be afraid to be hated for being a disciple. You shouldn't be afraid to be hated for being here tonight and standing for life. We're so afraid of what people think of us, particularly now I'm going to speak to the folks under my age, particularly well under my age, who life is all about being noticed in social media and having attention drawn to you and being patted on the back for how nice things are, how good you are. And I'm not saying that there's a bunch of snowflakes here who can't hear anything that disturbs them. But I'm not even talking snowflakes. I'm talking a generation and generations who are afraid of the worst thing they can be called. What's the worst thing a millennial or even those younger can be called? Judgmental. How dare you judge anything? You are absolutely right. You should never judge anyone. But that does not mean you should not judge anything. And I know it's hard. I know it's painful. I know it's a sacrifice. But I would encourage every millennial to write John 15:18 on their palm. And if you aren't willing to make that sacrifice, you got to think long and hard about why you're here on this earth. And we can go around and say, oh, I'm a good whatever, if you aren't willing to stand for the truth. Tonight you have an opportunity to stand for the truth. You have an opportunity to do something really special. I thought Tim, when he said I was going to rebut some one of the things I said, because at lunch I said, I was sitting with Pastor, first name is JJ, I can't remember his last name. And we were talking about the shootings. And I said, the one commonality that I've talked about, but nobody else on TV, yes, I am on CNN, please pray for me. I'll be on Sunday morning if you want to watch. But last Sunday morning I was on and I made the comment that every shooter since Columbine has had one thing in common. They were raised without a dad in the home. And I said, while you have wonderful programs here, I didn't see a program about mentoring and caring for dads. It's great to save a baby, but we need to be about the whole family. We need to make sure that that baby has a father. I don't know whether that father's going to be married to the mother, but that baby needs a father. We've sort of gone through a period of time in our culture, we see fathers as sort of the fifth wheel, not really necessary to make the car run. But we all know girls and boys need moms and dads. And increasingly, dad is missing from the equation. A majority of children in America born today, listen to me, a majority of children born in America today will be raised in a family without a father. A majority. Don't let that happen with your children. I mean, your children here at Crossroads. I'm talking to the men in this audience. Yes, I want you to contribute. But I want you to think about mentoring. I want to think about volunteering. I know some of you may mentor young men, and that's wonderful, other than your own children. But think about mentoring a young man who's going to mentor another young man or young woman. You get two for the price of one. Think about volunteering, because I know, and I found out afterward, that Tim does do mentoring. He does. How about you? I know you're busy. I know you're busy. But when I ask you to do something, you say, what can I do? Here's one thing you can do. You say, will that make a difference? Yes, it will make a difference. Everything you do that serves him will make a difference, because you're doing your part, and then God, of course, can multiply that 100-fold. Do you doubt that? Do you doubt if you make that sacrifice, if you make that commitment, that he won't bless that? You just have to do it. I mean, you can sit and pray and ask God to intercede, that's fine. But as it says in the Bible, faith without works is dead. Work. And he didn't mean your job. He meant working to pursue God's will in your life. So I ask all the men in this audience to pray about that tonight. Even those who think, well, I wouldn't be any good at it, or I'm too busy, pray about it, please. I hope Tim is overwhelmed next week with men who want to mentor. I guarantee he'll find something for you. I came to the United States Senate as a Christian who didn't really know what the Lord wanted in my life, because he was just a part of my life. he wasn't the center of my life. When that changed, everything changed. Yes, I took on the role of leading the partial birth abortion bill. I took on other issues that made me wildly unpopular. And I suffered for it. I won't say how because some of it's particularly gruesome. But I lost my race in 2006. I would add, not just lose my race. I lost by the largest margin of any incumbent senator in 25 years. I got crushed. But then I was blessed with Bella. And Bella changed my life. That cross, that sacrifice, that pain changed my life. And I decided when I saw, because I got into the trisomy 18 world, and I found out what children around the world, how they were treated by governments with socialized medicine. And I heard horror story after horror story. And so when Obamacare came along, I decided I had to go out there and do something. So I started to do radio and TV, anything. I stooped, I went to Frank Beckman's show and even called into Frank's show. And that's back when the Red Wings were good and it was hard to call in. Then a strange thing happened. Because I was pouring in, I thought this is what I was called to do. I got an invitation to speak at an event at University of Dubuque. And so what we did is, because I was trying to publicize my activities, we sent out a release saying I was going to speak at the University of Dubuque. That's in Iowa, by the way. And I got a call from Politico. And they said, hey, understand you're going to Iowa. I said, yeah, I'm speaking at the University of Dubuque. I got an invitation to speak to this group. And they said, oh, you're running for president? I said, no, I don't know. I'm going to speak. So you're not running for president? I said, well, no, I didn't say I'm not running for president. I'm not saying I am running for president. I said, it's not even it's like, it has nothing to do with this. I'm just giving this speech. Oh, okay, so you're not running for president. I said, I am not, and I am not running for president, okay? And he said, why do you keep a seat? He said, well, no one goes to Iowa in the middle of winter unless they're running for president. And I said, well, I'm not, I'm no comment. I mean, it's not relevant to this discussion. So later that night, I'm sitting with my mother-in-law watching, I shouldn't say this now, but I'm watching Fox News. And we're having a conversation. The next thing I know, my mother-in-law screams. She says, Rick, you're running for president. It says it right there in the crawl on Fox News. So the reporter went out and published front page, Rick Santorum going out and considering running for president. So I show up to Iowa, C-SPAN cameras, all the national networks are there, reporters from all the major papers. I get huge coverage. And I think, this is a pretty good gig. So, of course, a month later, I go to New Hampshire. Same thing. Everybody shows up. Everybody starts listening to me. So I just keep it up. I'm campaigning against Obamacare. So I'm doing it. And, well, what happened? I finally went to my wife, after having been 16 years in politics, the first 16 years of our marriage, I might add. And I said, hey, I think we have to sort of make a decision. I didn't say what, I just said, we have to make a decision, and her answer was no. I said, well, let's get to the question about what we're making a decision about. She goes, I know what it is. The answer is no. I said, well, I understand that, it could be your first reaction to this. I said, but, I've been praying a lot. Always use that, by the way. It's very good. I've been praying a lot, and I really feel like, and didn't get that. No. I said, well, come on. I said, you should pray about it. What wife is going to say, no, I'm not going to pray? My wife. She says, no, I'm not going to pray about it. God could not possibly want you to do this. I said, okay. I said, we'll consider that undecided and we'll come back and talk about it in a few weeks. It's a fluid situation, like a lot of things. So in the end, well, I shouldn't say in the end. So we went on for several more months, and the only person in the country, in the country, who encouraged me to run for president was my 12-year-old daughter, Sarah Maria. She had folders and state by state, numbers, everything. She was so into this. For the record, 3 months after I started running, she said I shouldn't run and should get out of the race. So, of course, I ran. With Karen's consent eventually. And she said, Rick, I always knew that this is what God wanted us to do, but I just don't want to do it. It's just too hard. And it's hard. It's brutal. You know how brutal it is. But you don't live it every day. It's brutal, and it's not just brutal on you, it's brutal on your wife and your kids. And you know what? They hit them. They just don't hit me. In the world today, you see it. They hit everybody. And the worst thing is you can't even fight back most of the time. What kind of father are you? You can't protect your kids or your wife. It hurts. But you got to keep going. But it hurts. You talk about pain, you talk about sacrifice. How about this? We start running and we don't raise any money. We raise enough just to keep us breathing. The way I like to describe it is I was breathing through a swizzle stick running a marathon. But that's what I was doing. And somehow or another, we made it work. Throughout the course of the campaign, I was the laughed off candidate. The debates of 7 of us, I'd have to struggle to get on the debate stage. And if I did, I was always at the far end. I would get the least amount of questions. After 14 debates, they did a categorizing of how much time each candidate got to answer the questions. I had less than half the time that the top candidate had. And far behind everybody else. I was a asterisk in the national polls. Going into the Iowa caucuses, I was the only person of all the candidates who had never been first in the polls at some point in time, and me. All the questions leading up to the Iowa caucuses were, why are you still in this race? They didn't want to listen to anything I said. The question was, after I'd do it, why are you still in this race? I did 385 town hall meetings over the course of a year in Iowa alone, and I campaigned other places. You know how much time I spent at home with 7 children? Average attendance at those town hall meetings, 385, 12 people. No, I am not easily discouraged. But something happened right around Christmas time, 2 weeks before the Iowa caucuses. All of a sudden, my numbers started to go up. A week before the Iowa caucuses, out of nothing, I spent no money. I spent less than $200,000 on television in Iowa. Rick Perry spent $8 million. And all of a sudden, I'm ahead of him and almost everybody else. So that Sunday, I went to church. In fact, I went to a couple of churches. I couldn't get enough church on that Sunday. One church had me speak. Cornerstone Church in Sioux City, Iowa. Pastor Kerry Gordon. And he had me speak, and I told my story. And afterwards, I walked down off the pulpit, and he walked over to me, and he handed me a little case. And in that case, he said, he said, I was sitting at my desk and I saw these on my bookshelf and I thought I had to give them to you. I said, okay. So I opened them up. It's like a jewelry case. And I saw two round things that were sort of old and greenish tint. I looked at them. I thought, And I thought, well, maybe they're cufflinks. So I sort of picked them up, but there was no hardware link behind the little thing. And so I'm sitting there toiling with him, and he says, well, what do you think? Oh, they're beautiful. Thank you. And he says, do you know what they are? So, of course, busted at that point. I said, no, Pastor, I don't. What are they? He said, you have been traveling around the state of Iowa with nobody paying attention to you. And I told him why I was doing what I was doing. He said, and you were giving everything you had. And getting nothing in return, but you didn't stop. You kept doing what you were called to do. You gave everything. And he says, and I predict that you will be blessed. I said, well, thank you. And he said, you're holding something I got in Jerusalem last time I was there. They're 2,000 years old. They are widow's mites. God promised us in that parable that if you are faithful, if you give, not out of excess, but out of need, that God can do miraculous things with those that offer that at his altar. And so here you are. I know many of you came in and said, well, I'm going to give this much tonight. Or I'm going to do this to help the ministry. Is any of you come in here thinking, I'm going to give the widow's mite tonight? I'm going to give out of need because I know when I do, the Lord will richly bless this ministry and by result this country. I'll do what I can do. I'm not responsible for everybody else, but I am responsible for me. I am responsible for my relationship. I am responsible for my country, for my community, and for my neighbor. Because the good book says we are. Mother Teresa says, we're not called to do great things. We're called to do little things with great love. How much love is in your heart right now for these women and these children who in the next week will not know about Crossroads and kill their child and have to live with that the rest of their life because we didn't let them know there was a choice. I hate to say it, it's on you. It's not on me, it's on you. We got to accept this. We got to accept that just writing it out, just doing what we've been doing isn't good enough. I'll tell one final story, because I'm in Michigan. And this story is about Michigan. No, it's not about the election, which of course I lost in the state of Michigan, to Mitt Romney. I don't want you to feel bad about that. But I will tell you this, we lost by the narrowest of margins. Very, very close race. We had just won 3 states. We were coming in on a high. And in a book after the election interview, Mitt Romney said, Had he lost the state of Michigan to me, he would have dropped out of the race. But we didn't win. And you know what county provided the complete election margin for Mitt Romney in the Michigan primary? The exact margin in this county happened to be the exact margin I lost the state by. Want to guess? Oakland County. So this is painful. I'm coming back to, this is a painful place, folks. I remember going to Novi for the dinner, the Republican dinner. It hurt. So if I can do this, if I can come back, I don't want to say you owe me, but let that sink in there a little bit, how the world could have been a little different place. For those of you who want to come up and say, hey, maybe you should think about running for president, just think a little bit about that. My story goes to when I was debating the partial birth abortion bill back in 1998. We debated it in 96, 98, and 2000. Each time we passed it, President Clinton vetoed it, and we tried to override President Clinton's veto. In fact, it is the only time I can think about in my being aware of Washington, D.C. since the 1980s. It's the only time I can think about that Congress ever tried to override a presidential veto. Can you think of any? I can't. I can't think of one time in the last 30 years where a president has vetoed a bill and the Congress has even attempted to override it. Presidents usually don't veto bills anymore. Well, in part because nothing ever passes, but it's very rare. But it happened here. And it passed the House. The veto override passed the House. It always came down to the Senate. And in 96, we came 4 votes short. In 98, we were 2 votes short going into the day. We had closed the gap. I'd been debating for a week with everybody, Feinstein and Stabenow and Boxer and you name it. They were all up there. Well, this was the last day of the debate. I had 6 hours of debate on the floor with Barbara Boxer. I always say spending 6 hours of debate with Barbara Boxer on the floor of the United States Senate entitles me to time off in purgatory. I'm going to make my case. So I finished. It was 8 o'clock at night. The vote was the next morning, first thing in the morning, first vote. And I was sitting there, and I had one of those times that I didn't get very often as the United States Senator, and that was quiet time. Because everybody had left. The staff was putting together what we call the closing script to take us out, adjourn the Senate for that night. And it was just me and Mike DeWine from Ohio, who was the senator there. He was sitting in the chair, presiding officer. And I'm sitting there, and sort of like Mike Pence, I heard the Lord talk to me. And no, I'm not mentally ill. No, I didn't hear his voice, but I felt something like powerful, saying you had to say more. There's something else you needed to say, something else you didn't cover that you need to talk about. You need to talk about all these children who were contacting you, hurt, outraged at hearing senator after senator get up and say that we had to keep this procedure legal of tearing children apart after they're born. We had to keep this procedure legal because late in pregnancies, moms and dads find out that the baby they were expecting isn't exactly what they were expecting. That the child had some deformity or disability, some condition or disease. And as a result, we had to keep this procedure legal so we could remove the problem. And so we heard from so many people with congenital birth defects who wrote us. I'll never forget a kid from London, not a kid, he was 37 years old with spina bifida, wrote. He said, I sit here and I watch people talk about why I should be killed. And so I remember going back into the cloakroom At the time, we didn't have these, so I had to use an actual landline. Remember those landlines? Went into the cloakroom, got a landline, called my wife. Our daughter, Sarah Maria, who at the time was 2, crying. The other 4 kids at home, I'm sure, causing all sorts of problems. We homeschooled. So imagine mom, after a full day of homeschooling, hearing from her husband at 8 o'clock at night saying, honey, I feel like I have to stay longer at work. Why? Well, because God asked me to. And the answer was the same answer she always gave me. If that's what God's calling you to do, that's what you got to do. So I went back down on the floor and I went to Mike DeWine. I said, look, I'm only going to be a few minutes, but I got to cover a couple of things. I got to, hopefully, as all the members are home, some of these folks may be watching C-SPAN. You know, not all senators have great social lives. And maybe 1 or 2 of those votes, maybe I can swing them. So an hour and a half later, I finished. Don't worry, I'm almost done. I poured out my heart. I felt like, I just nailed it. I went home, my kids were in bed, my wife was asleep. I got up the next morning, as always, 5 a.m., out the door. Got to the Senate floor, worked the interviews, did everything I could, got to the floor, and we lost by 2 votes. I remember sitting there feeling like I had never been more of a failure in my life. Not only did we lose, but I'm sitting here thinking, here's another night that I put something ahead of my children. Something. Important, but not as important. My kids were second. My wife was second. And then I started really working on me. It's your pride. You're so prideful. You think you can do all these things. Oh man, I just worked myself over. Then 5 days later, I got an email. It was from a young man from Michigan State University. And this is what it said. Wednesday night, my girlfriend and I were sitting watching television. We were flipping through the channels and we saw you standing next to a poster of a young man with a disability. And so we stopped to listen. And we were mesmerized by the passion that you showed and how wrong this procedure was. And as we were listening, I looked down and I saw my girlfriend had tears running down her cheeks. I asked her what was wrong. And she looked up to me and she said, I'm pregnant. And I wasn't going to tell you that I'm having an abortion in 2 days. But I'm not going to have an abortion anymore. That little girl is 19 years old. She was adopted. Is 19 years old, somewhere. Don't know her name. So when you sit and pray tonight, before Tim asks you to help, I want you to think about what you can do. I want you to think about the widow's mite. I want you to think about failure. That what you do might not work. That what you give might not be enough. But remember, that means that you probably just didn't get the email. God never lets you fail when you do what He's calling you to do. You may fail in the eyes of the world. You may fail in your own eyes or your worse yet, your wife's eyes. But you will not fail. Because God will bless everything you do. This country needs the love that this organization shows to those who do not experience love, and certainly not at this time in their life of a crisis pregnancy. That child needs your love, or he or she will not see the light of day. This community needs the love of this organization. And it's not big enough. It needs more. And there's only one group of people who can make that happen. So do it. God bless you.